YouTube. So today's video is going to be the history documented through police reports and court filings between Michelle and I, Sabrina and I, Walter and I, and a lot of the details that form part of my deportation story that have recently began to be told through a false narrative, or perhaps a different narrative, a different perspective, through another content creator by the name of Julia Garcia. So it's important for me to share the context of this relationship and turbulent history between Michelle and I that has transpired for years, that has to date returned to present day, through a online hate campaign that is being rallied by Julia Garcia. 8 weeks ago, a police report was provided to Julia. That is one police report of many that forms part of my story, my deportation story, and the drama between Walter and his family and I. Unfortunately, Julia has not been entirely honest about where her content about me was born from. Some of you have been fooled into thinking that it began between a TikTok between her and I where we just didn't see eye to eye. But it actually, her content is Michelle's voice through Julia. And I'm going to piece everything together for you so you can kind of understand the context and see some of the dishonesty or the parts of the story that have been left out to feed this narrative. Beginning with the police report that became the topic of one of Julia's YouTube videos about my story. So this police report was claimed to be public records, and this police report, we will be showing the entire police report on this video that you can read in thorough, because only bits and pieces of it were provided or read out loud, and it was very vague. And I want to start by talking about how one would acquire a police report if it had not been received by somebody that already had it. So Julia Garcia has claimed that this police report is public record, and she obtained it through such, which would be a grammar request. Police reports can be public records, and they can be acquired by submitting a grammar request with the police department that handled the crime or the report. In this case, Julia would have had to find out which police department in Utah was overlooking this incident, provide a report number or a date, and the names of individuals involved. She would then have to provide a form of ID to the police department, pay a fee, and wait between 10 to 15 days to be provided with this report. So all of these things in mind, it would have been impossible for Julia to receive this report through a public records request. But this was not provided in her story, because if it was, she would need to provide the truth of where she got the police report from, which is either Michelle or Sabrina, because these are individuals who have these police reports as part of the custody proceedings through Walter and I. These police reports, so when you're requesting a police report, if you are not a party to the case, the police department will redact certain information about the case, about individuals, names, dates, addresses, to protect the privacy. Now, if you are a party to this report, whether you were the person who filed it or a party named in the report, then that gives you access to the full report, which is how Julia was able to obtain a lot of the information. So this report was actually provided to her by Michelle and or Sabrina. And we're going to get into that report. Again, I will be showing you in detail. But it's important for me to explain that, because had that been provided in the YouTube video, that Julia has actually been voicing Michelle's narrative, it would have discredited a lot of what's been going on the past 8 weeks. Because as you know, Michelle is someone that has worked feverishly for many years to aid in my deportation, and now to aid in the and now to make sure that my U visa is not approved so that I cannot return to the US. So let's begin with the affidavit of Michelle. A quick recap on the affidavit of Michelle Bayesatin. If you did not read it, feel free to pause or scroll back. This is an affidavit from Michelle stating that while Walter was in jail, she gained access of my Facebook account because somehow, supposedly, I had forgotten to log out of my Facebook account on Walter's laptop. Now, I dispute some of the claims in this because I don't recall ever signing in to my Facebook account on Walter's laptop. Nonetheless, she had full access to my Facebook account for a period of 6 weeks. I had no idea that this was happening until 6 weeks later, when my attorney received some of these documents that were then forwarded over to me. So through this affidavit, Michelle admits that she has been watching me real time. Well, she didn't admit that yet, but she pretty much just admits that, hey, I had her Facebook account and I went through her entire account. Not only did she do that, but she stayed logged in for the entire 6 weeks. And during that time, she monitored all of my content, all of my messages, real time. And I was completely unaware. Now, I used Facebook Messenger at the time, kind of like texting. That's where I was having my conversations with Maggie, which is my best friend at the time. I was venting, I was plotting, I was committing crimes on Facebook. So a lot of the content on these Facebook messages that Michelle gained access to were very incriminating. Imagine, being at war and your enemy getting a hold of your most vulnerable text messages between you and your best friend, which is what transpired here. Okay, so before we get into the next slide, Michelle now has full access over my entire Facebook. I am unaware, and I am committing a lot of crimes through my Facebook account. This was during the time that I was committing my felonies. And again, I was using Messenger as a tool, as a way to communicate, primarily. So long story short, this was during the time that I was arrested for the checks. And I was arrested for the checks because I was communicating with my co-defendant through the Facebook messages. Michelle was watching real time and she contacted the police. From there, my house was raided, I was arrested, and I was sent to jail. And nobody knew that I had been sent to jail except for my family and Bryce, who had came to pick up all 4 of my children. At the time, I only had 4 children, and I was about 6 months pregnant, give or take, maybe 4 months, I don't remember. I was really pregnant with the baby. So anyway, I am now in jail. While I am in jail, Michelle, through my Facebook messages, was able to A, find out that I went to jail, B, find out where my son was. And while I was in jail, they went to my babysitters, and tried to pick up my son Axel. So here's the next slide. So this affidavit states that a day after I went to jail, and my son was taken to his regular child care provider by my family, who had taken custody of him immediately after my incarceration. Michelle and Walter's sister showed up unannounced to her residence and tried to take my son while I was in jail. Now, let me give you some context of why this was so alarming to me, because at this point, when I'm sitting in jail and my family told me what happened, I had no idea how they knew where he was, how they knew I had gone to jail just 12 hours earlier, and what they were plotting, because both Walter was in jail, I was in jail. They didn't have any legal right to try to take him. And I was furious and I panicked and I felt like they're trying to take my son. And so immediately, I pulled out of jail maybe 48 hours later with the help of my brother. And I sought legal counsel immediately. I handed this over to my attorney and I said, this is not okay. I don't know how they found him. I don't know how they knew that I was here. And so long story short, my attorney takes over and he starts connecting with Walter's attorney, and we get a hold of this affidavit. And so I'm now told that she has been watching my Facebook for weeks. And so immediately I changed my password. I start kind of putting two together that this is how she has been watching me. So what she did was she stalked me through my Facebook account for weeks. She monitored where I was, what I was doing. She called the police on me for criminal activity, which, you can have your own opinion that she did the right thing or not. And I led her to my son. And at the time, I didn't know the extent of information that she had. So anyway, my attorney filed a stalking injunction against her. And so here comes the next slide. Okay, so a stalking injunction was issued by the court against Michelle on the basis of this affidavit that she had filed in these other cases, where she admitted to gaining unlawful I guess you can argue if it was unlawful or not, because she claims that, I just kind of stumbled upon it. I refute that because I never used Walter's laptop for Facebook. So somehow she hacked my Facebook account. It was my side of the story. Anyway, a judge orders her to stop the dissemination of the Facebook messages and to stop stalking me. Now, a stalking injunction is a civil order from a judge that just orders you to stay away from an individual. It is not criminal. It does not affect you in anything as long as you stay away from that individual. So in these screenshots provided, these are court documents. You can see where the court issues the stalking injunction and the order. This stalking injunction protects me and Axel, where she can no longer come near me. This meant that even, if my son went to Walter's for parent time, she could not be around him. So after this was issued, she hired an attorney to fight the stalking injunction. I'm going to give you some content over what this experience was like for me at the time, to have, Michelle and Sabrina have access to such vulnerable information of mine, from, you know, stuff that I was doing on Facebook to conversations that I was having with my girlfriend. Okay, when we're going through breakups, just imagine all the conversations that you have with your girlfriend given over to the hands of the entire, anybody that will be willing to read them, right? So they were all over Facebook. They were disseminated to hundreds of individuals. And during this time, I was pregnant. I was going through my shit with Walter. I still had postpartum depression from Axel. Axel was only 8 months old at the time. So I was in a really dark place mentally and emotionally. And the mere fact that they had access to these Facebook messages was so fucking stressful to me. It was something, the invasion of privacy, I mean, I can't even word it. If you can try to put yourself in my shoes for just a moment of what type of shit you would get into if somebody got a hold of your messages with your best friend. And so a lot of these messages were used to feed, you know, or to aid law enforcement in painting me out to be a certain type of individual, which maybe at the time I was, again, I had lost touch with reality. I was just going through it between my own criminal cases and then these civil cases. So anyway, the next slide. Michelle hires an attorney, and a trial is set for the stalking injunction. So I went to trial with Michelle over this. I was 7 months pregnant when this trial was held, and I showed up to trial, and his entire family showed up behind her to support her in trying to get this case dismissed. A trial was held on this matter between Michelle and I when I was 7 months pregnant. It was a full-blown trial like you see in the movies. There was witnesses. She showed up with all of Walter's family behind her, his mother, his sister, her daughter. I showed up by myself with my sister, and everybody was cross-examined, evidence was presented, and these are the closing arguments that my attorney submitted on the basis that we were seeking the stalking injunction. There are a total of 4 pages where you can read through and see what our case was, how it was broken down to the court, including the laws that were cited in the relief that I was seeking. Now, her attorney also provided her side of the story, a closing summary that cited many of my criminal convictions, the fact that I had a fraudulent history, that I was a criminal, that I was a felon, and that I had fabricated all of this, and that this was just meant to harass Michelle. The judge took about 2 months to reach a verdict, and unfortunately for me, they dismissed the stalking injunction. When the stalking injunction was dismissed, no attorney's fees were awarded or addressed. The case was closed, the case was dismissed, and she was now free to continue her campaign of harassment. What comes next? So at this time, I am getting ready to deliver my 5th child, which is Walter and I's second baby, Gigi's. She is born on June 27th, 2017. 5 days later, Michelle filed a small claims case with a different judge in a different court seeking her attorney's fees. I was served on June 30th, literally 2 days after I came home from the hospital with my baby. Here are the next slides. So in these documents that Michelle files with a different court, with a different judge, she claims to them that, as you can see, I filed a stalking injunction against her on false allegations, which obligated her to retain an attorney, that I had alleged that she had gained unlawful access, that, you know, you can kind of go through the bullets. I lied supposedly that she attempted to take unlawful physical custody of my son, that I lied about her sending letters to my employment, that everything was a lie. And so on this basis, she sought for me to pay her attorney's fees. A court date was set in August 2017. And I need to give some background that at the time that I was fighting this particular case, I had just given birth to my daughter. I was unemployed, and I was running out of money to keep up on attorney's fees because this was not the only case that I was battling. I was battling my felony cases, which were of larger importance to me, my immigration case, and funding my custody case. So Michelle's case really took a back seat for me. I did not have my attorney take over this case. I did have him provide me with guidance and what to tell the judge when we went to court. And so we went to court in August 2017. Long story short, the small claims court judge sided with her and ordered me to pay her attorney's fees. Now, because this is a small claims case, and there's not much she can do if I don't pay, aside what regular creditors could do, which is file for garnishments, etc. Because of this case, I filed for bankruptcy. Now, bankruptcy granted me a level of protection from all creditors, including her, from being able to garnish my accounts or really seek any collection on this particular judgment. And because it was not of importance to me in comparison to my other cases, that's the route that I took. I filed bankruptcy, and she was no longer able to do anything with this particular case. But it doesn't stop there. So because she couldn't continue moving forward with this case, she started meddling in my other cases. So what we've just covered is where the root of anger for her was born from, what I did to her, right? By taking her to court for a civil stalking injunction, she had to retain an attorney, and she was angry. And this is the only thing that I have done to her, that I can say I did to her. In her view, it was done maliciously. In my view, it was done for protection for me and my children. And I have the opinion that I was in need of that stalking injunction, and that the court failed me. And had that stalking injunction been granted, I would have been protected from the months of harassment that I will show you through documents that followed after the stalking injunction was dismissed. Before we get into the next slides, at this point, I am going through my criminal cases. They are being litigated. I am out on bail, and I have been going back and forth to court throughout the birth of my daughter, through my pregnancy, and my sentencing dates for my felonies have been set for November 27th. Or something along those lines, 2017. My baby is about 8 weeks old at sentencing date. And the context of this is important so you can kind of see the timeline, right? So I am now facing sentencing. So I pleaded guilty to my felonies. And at this point, I still didn't have a lot of this information that I'm showing you. I didn't know everything that was happening, everything that had been done. I thought when the civil stalking injunction with Michelle was dismissed, that would be the end of her beef with me, because my focus was on my war with Walter, with the courts, with trying to stay out of prison, and the overhead of the pending deportation that I could face because of these crimes. And the biggest thing I had on my mind at the time was, am I going to prison? My daughter had just been born. I was living with my family, and so that was my main focus, right? So on my sentencing date, Michelle wrote a lengthy letter to my sentencing judge, and that I'm going to show you, and you can read through everything that was said. And this narrative is Michelle's narrative. This is Michelle's side of the story, and this is the same narrative that has been spun through Julia's content in the last 8 weeks. So here we go. My sentencing date is set for November 27th or 24th, give or take. It'll show the date coming up shortly. So here we go. Okay, so this is a very long letter. This is actually an 18-page document that was mailed by Michelle to my sentencing judge in my felony cases. You will need to pause to read. I will quickly skim over it, but she gave her narrative, her side of the story, all the things that I had done, all the things that had transpired between Walter and I, Sabrina and I. Some of them true, some of them not, some of them a little bit exaggerated, but this is her side of the story. And she sent this to my sentencing judge to, influence his decision in my sentencing in regards to my felonies that had nothing to do with these cases that she had sent in. In this narrative, you can also see that my children are brought into it. My mental health is questioned because I had done some of these things. Yes, some of these things are in this report. They are misrepresented, but some of them did happen. From, the shit that happened between Walter and I, the police, the false reports. I'll get into that next. I'll show you the slides. But my sentencing judge received this on the day of my sentencing anonymously. But as you see, this is the narrative. This is Michelle's side of the story. Now, my sentencing date was November 20th, 2017. My judge sentenced me to probation, among other things, mental health assessments, theft classes, restitution, and he ordered me to no jail time. I was not committed to prison. I was just placed on probation. A day after my sentencing hearing, Walter and his family filed a stalking injunction against me. The date of the stalking injunction is important because I want you to catch on to the plot behind these letters, right? So they send a sentencing letter to my judge with the hopes of having me incarcerated. That didn't work. So the very next morning, they file for a stalking injunction from Walter against me, saying that I have stalked him, etc. I will show you what that document looks like and the outcome of that case. Okay, so as you can see here, Walter and his family filed for a stalking injunction on November 21st, 2017, the next morning after my sentencing date, when I was not sent to prison. The stalking injunction requested an interesting verbiage of relief that you will see on the next slide. The relief sought included, requesting orders for me to relocate because my mother's house where I was residing was very close to Sabrina's, along with one of my close friends. It requested for me to remove all content of Walter and his daughter, and among other frivolous things that are not what stalking injunctions are actually designed for. The outcome of this case resulted in the fact that the court denied the request. As you can see per the court's decision, that there really was not a basis for this, and that my behavior was me protecting interest in prior and ongoing litigation. So what they were saying was stalking was really me being on top of my shit in court. So it was dismissed. Now I want to talk a bit about my state of mind through everything that I was going through. All these cases between Michelle's, Walter's, Sabrina's, immigration. My mental health had deteriorated. I was a mess. I was unwell inside and out. I definitely disconnected from reality, and I think some people lost. I guess I understand why people didn't have compassion for me, but I was pregnant. I was suffering from postpartum depression. I was suffering from depression in general. I was trying to recover from all of the abuse that happened between Walter and I, and I did seek mental help. I went to a therapist. I was seeing a therapist through the course of all of my cases. I went, I believe, like every other week, and I did receive a mental health assessment. And I wanted to share that because I think my mental state of mind throughout all my criminal, activity, from the felonies to the shit that I did to Walter and Sabrina, and the get back games that we played, and the obsession that I developed in seeing Walter leave me for Sabrina while I was pregnant with our second child. So I wanted to shine light on my mental health, my mental diagnosis, and bring some awareness to mental disorders. So I went to a psychologist, and I'm going to share with you some documents from my mental health assessment, which diagnosed me with a personality disorder. Here we go. So reading from Google, what is a personality disorder? I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. All right, so I'm borderline personality disorder. So I'm just going to read straight from Google what this disorder is. Borderline personality disorder is a mental health disorder that impacts the way that you think, feel about yourself and others, causing problems functioning in everyday life. It includes self-damaging issues, difficulty managing emotions and behavior, and a pattern of unstable relationships. Okay. 9 symptoms of BPD. Fear of abandonment. People with BPD are often terrified of being abandoned or left alone. Unstable relationships. Impulsive or self-destructive behaviors. Extreme emotional swings. Chronic feelings of emptiness, anger. For me, I identify a ton with being impulsive. My crimes that I committed were impulsive. The things that I did to Walter were impulsive. The tire slashing of slashing Sabrina's tire was impulsive. A lot of really crazy things that I did. I feel like I had, when Walter and I split up and everything hit the fan, I feel like I had I don't even know how to explain it, but just an episode, month-long episode of just losing my fucking mind, all right? And so I went to therapy for this, and I received my diagnosis. I wasn't put on any pills or anything, but it gave me some awareness into why I was doing the things that I was doing, why I had reacted the way that I had reacted. For example, when I look back on my crimes, from the false information to police, from the false information to get Walter incarcerated to the felonies, etc., I can kind of piece together and see that I was just not fully there, right? So I wanted to share this because very often when women lose their shit, after months or years of abuse and being pushed and pushed and pushed, whether by Walter or Sabrina or Michelle at this point, I snapped and I lost, I was crazy. I was labeled like a fucking psycho. She's just bitter, she's just this, she's just that. And I was very bitter and hurt. But above that, I was mentally ill. And I still am. This is a disorder that I will carry with me for probably the rest of my life. There are ways to manage the disorder. There are things that you can do. And this disorder will affect my relationships, my ability to, so many things. Do some research. I'm sure there's a lot of you that can relate. There's tons of us with these disorders. The majority of us have not been diagnosed because the majority of us don't go to, don't seek mental help, unfortunately. Switching gears a little bit. So I'm going to get into some of the court documents between Walter and I. And what was the initial incident of domestic violence between us that got the courts involved with our families. Okay. This next document is the charging document where Walter was charged with domestic violence in the presence of a child due to an altercation between us. So pretty much Walter and I got into a fight in front of Axel, and Walter was, intoxicated. He got mad. He punched the wall, broke something, and then took off like a bat out of hell. I called police. I reported it. Mainly I just didn't want him to come back. And they took a report of what had happened, and I didn't know this, but because he had damaged property, it was classified as a domestic violence. And they charged him about 3 weeks later. I didn't know about this. They didn't contact me. They just charged him. We later got back together, and we were actually together when he was charged. About 2 weeks later after he was charged is when we had our fallout, right? And he left, and he went back to Sabrina, and this is when I lost my shit. And so at that time, that charge had already been filed, and so I went with that charge to legal aid, and I filed for a protective order. I filed for a protective order so that he wouldn't come back to my house, and to I knew that if I filed this protective order, it was over, right? And so I filed the protective order for him to stay away from me. And now I was so fucking crazy that although I was telling the court to tell him to stay away from me, I didn't really want him to stay away from me. I wanted him to come home and try, and that sent me even crazier that he didn't. So what I did was what Michelle mentioned in some of her narrative, that I fabricated evidence so that they would charge him with violation of that protective order, send him to jail, and get him away from Sabrina, because that's how fucked up I was over the fact that he had left me pregnant to go back to her. And yes, nothing that I say or do can justify the fact that I used the resources that I did to throw him in jail. Yes, he was innocent. Yes, he didn't violate that protective order. I had just lost my mind. I had lost my fucking mind. And so here is a document, and as you can see, he was charged with, just a misdemeanor. Now, this is when he went to jail. Michelle stepped in to get him out of jail on these charges. They succeeded. They were dropped. I actually called the prosecutor. I let the prosecutor know I lied about this. He didn't actually violate. I felt guilty pretty quickly, like 2 weeks in. Anyway, long story short, they ended up charging me with, false information to the police report with Michelle's help and my own admissions that I had lied. Walter gets out of jail. He gets all the charges dropped, including the original domestic violence charge, because I had lied about the violations. Now, the original domestic violence charge, he was guilty of. He was, but due to me lying about what happened after, they dismissed it because I was not a credible witness. And so that's what happened there. And those are kind of like the original events that set everything else, like that set the domino effect in place, right? Okay, so here we have a supplemental police report from Detective Black from the West Valley City Police Department where, they document how they went out to my place of employment to interview me regarding these allegations that I had lied to get Walter in jail. They were being assisted by Michelle in my Facebook messages, but at that time I didn't know it. This was during the time that Michelle was actively tracking where I was working. I had only worked at this body shop for a week, so I was really kind of shook when the police showed up. I didn't know how they found me. But I had shared with Maggie through Facebook Messenger that I had finally found a job, right? I was out on bail, and it had been really difficult to find a job because I was all over the news after my felonies. So anyway, right before this incident, Michelle had also mailed a letter to my employer letting them know that right after, letting them know that I had been charged with these convictions and that, be careful, you don't know what you're going to do. Long story short, I got fired over this letter. So at this point, Michelle's goal, Michelle, Sabrina's, Walter's, whoever does, I don't know who it is. Nobody wants to take credit for it, right? Michelle says that it's Sabrina. Sabrina will say that Michelle Michelle would say it was Walter. Who fucking knows? Anyway, they all had the tunnel vision to either get me in jail or get me deported. And they were having a hard time getting me in jail because, you know, my sentencing judge didn't, I think they really banked on the idea that I would go to prison for my felonies, but I didn't. So they, you know, upgrade from going to the district courts to going to the immigration court. So this is the time that Michelle gets in touch with my ICE agent. And at this time, I start trying to kind of move on with my life. And the incident of domestic violence that qualified me for a U visa transpired. And we're going to get into that. So I've given a couple of story times on my TikTok about my relationship with an ex-boyfriend where we have years and years of documented domestic violence incidents that eventually graduated into a shooting, right? So here's a police report to that incident, which resulted in the incarceration of my ex. He did prison time. I did assist law enforcement in prosecuting this crime. Pretty much what happened is, you know, Will and I have a lot of history dating back to 2013. He comes over to a party. He brings a gun. He is using drugs, so he's like super paranoid. Long story short, he shoots up the house that we're having a Halloween party at. Police report is filed. He's taken in jail. He's caught. Blah blah blah. Like, that is a whole story in its own. I will maybe make a YouTube video about that another day. All right. So because of this shooting, all right, I'm not no gangster. So yes, I filed for an actual protective order. Again, I filed for a protective order. I was granted it right away because of the nature of the crime. And because Sabrina works at this law firm, right, the law office of Roberto Hernandez, she was keeping track of all my cases through a program called Exchange, which you have access to if you work at a law firm or if you're paralegal, etc. So Michelle took it upon herself to mail a letter to the judge in my protective order case against Will, trying to deter him from granting me a protective order and telling him that I'm just trying to grab onto anything to file for a U visa. Now, how did I know that it was Michelle? Now, Michelle always sent in her letters anonymously, but she fucked up on this one because the court scans in not only the letter, but also the envelope that it arrives in. So here's the envelope that this letter arrived in. And look at the handwriting, okay? Now we're going to reference back to the small claims court document that Michelle filed pro se with the same handwriting. So see how it matches? So, and you can also see that the tone is the same, the narrative is the same, the verbiage is the same, the energy is the same. And these are the same, this is the same energy that is transpiring through Julia's content for the last 8 weeks. Here we have the supplemental police report in the case with Will and I, where, you know, some follow-up happens with the police and he kind of admits to it. These are the documents that were used to eventually convict him. Well, he actually pled guilty. But it's important to note that this was a case where Michelle really had nothing to do with this case. Neither did Will, neither did Sabrina, neither did Walter. But they intervened because they wanted to make sure that I did not have any type of claim to a U visa, anything that could hold me here, because they were feverishly preying on my deportation. So after this happened, I am eventually turned over to ICE thanks to Michelle. I have shown these emails on my TikTok, Instagram, but here they are again. I received these emails on behalf of Sabrina. Sabrina, a couple years after my deportation, reached out. She apologized and she gave me all the receipts for what was done by her and Michelle. And you can kind of see what transpired. Michelle sent a lot of information to them, manipulated information from my social media to fit a narrative that, you know, I was not taking care of my kids, I was dangerous, I was harassing her, and I needed to be picked up immediately, which is what eventually happened. These messages really speak for themselves, as you can see here, and she was corresponding with them the morning that I was picked up from court with Walter. All right, here we have a report from my probation officer that was filed in my felony cases after my deportation, where you can just kind of see that a bitch was trying, okay? I was completely compliant with the terms of my probation, but unfortunately, because I was picked up by ICE, it is what it is. My probation officer asked to close out my case, but they actually issued a bench warrant in my felony case, although I was deported. So if I ever go back, I do need to deal with these cases. Anyway, so All right, so we have just gone down a rabbit hole of court filings and police reports that give you some background to the history, the turbulent history between Michelle and I, that has been dating back for years. You know, it was really hard to put this video together because it involved hours of going back through my email and reading through documents and reliving it. I relived all the drama. It doesn't put me in a good place. It doesn't feel good. But I believe it's now an important part of this story to give context to some of what's been going on in the last 8 weeks, because bits and pieces of the story have been told by somebody who is not a part of the story. And, you know, I understand that everybody has different perspectives of, you know, we all experience things differently. So perhaps Michelle has more, you know, feelings, but a lot of what I presented today are the facts of what happened between us, me and Michelle. Now, there are additional court filings and police reports of things that transpired between Sabrina and I, Walter and I. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the content that has been created for the last 8 weeks on Julia's platform and where this stems from. As I mentioned previously, some of you were fooled into believing that it derived from a TikTok exchange between her and I, and she went from a follower supporter to spending 8 weeks down the rabbit hole, dissecting my life, exposing my story, in her words, discussing my family, employing her followers to report my accounts, to stop, to interfere with my platforms, to interfere with the GRC Foundation, to build this narrative that I'm a scammer and that I'm this terrible person. And I mean, if you watch the content, you know what it is. If you'd like to go watch the content, feel free, so you can kind of catch up to speed. But I want you to pay attention to the narrative of this content based on everything that I have laid out from my turbulent history with Michelle. And I believe that Julia is somebody that very much enjoys the attention that she has received from speaking about my story on her platforms, particularly from a victim point of view or a victim stance, with her claim that she was fat shamed and bullied by my followers, and that sent her down this rabbit hole of trying to share awareness on these things that had happened in my life and my family's, to a degree that it has matched the obsession of Michelle. It has matched the energy of Michelle. The collabs that I have on my TikToks have been contacted. Anybody that has worked with me in the last year has been contacted with this, with these videos, with this storyline, with this narrative that Michelle has been pushing since before I arrived here. And I believe Julia initially began this as a form of entertainment, and it quickly has spiraled out of control on her end, and it has grown into the same obsession that Michelle had, and seeing me break, really. And the reason why some of this has been so triggering for me is because I feel the same energy that I felt from Michelle, and the same manners and the same verbiage, the same storyline. And this is all stuff from close to 5 years ago. All of these events, everything that transpired between Walter and I, Sabrina and I, Michelle and I, happened 5 to 6 years ago. I've grown since, I have changed since, I have built an entirely new life, and I'm confident in saying that these individuals can no longer speak on who I am, but they can speak on experiences that they had with me during that time. Julia, however, is a complete stranger. I have never met her. I don't know much about her life. And I have, in the same manner that I have struggled to understand Michelle's obsessions, I have struggled to understand Julia's. Julia has, incited all of her followers to report and slander and bully. I've received threats. I've received a lot of shit. This is not worth sitting here and dissecting. What's important is the actual storyline, because, bits and pieces of it were thrown out by Julia in her friendship with Michelle. And if I am wrong, and, she didn't receive these messages and emails from Michelle, Sabrina, or friends, it could be easily disproved. But the reason why it hasn't been mentioned where these receipts were received from is because it would discredit the entire campaign she has spent 8 weeks on. If people knew how far she has gone to dig into my personal life as far as contacting individuals in Utah to try to shed light on some type of my story, when really it has become an obsession in retelling my story with a different narrative, a more entertaining narrative. And I have now laid out all the facts, all the receipts, all the court documents. And I will say this, the dissemination of my private Facebook messages to date is an invasion of privacy to a level that you couldn't understand. There's a lot of things that you talk to your girlfriends about that you may not necessarily mean, particularly when you are going through some shit. We vent, we plot, we talk, we discuss, etc. And those messages are not being disseminated on Julia's platform. And again, it's a direct connection to Michelle and her pattern of behavior, and how much those Facebook messages have been used in, trying to, I guess, what's the word? Trying to break me, I guess. Trying to expose me, or whatever we want to call it. So anyway, we, again, have just gone down a rabbit hole of bullshit. All right, so in summary, Julia's content is Michelle's narrative, and Michelle has found a voice through Julia. And the one question would maybe be, well, why can't Michelle come on and share her side of the story? Well, many reasons. First of all, Michelle's family is are owners of a large corporation in Salt Lake City that work predominantly with the Latino community. And if it got leaked that Michelle worked hand in hand with ICE, it could potentially affect her father, her family, etc. And then number two, Walter's brother has expressed a lot of distaste in her involvement with my case, and they've had a lot of issues in their relationship because of her obsession with me. So it's unfortunately not something that Michelle could do directly without affecting her personal life. So she has now found her voice through Julia, and Julia has become her puppet. And Julia is now doing all the dirty work for her while all the heat has deflected off Michelle. If you guys recall, when Walter first got here, and even before then, a lot of heat was on Michelle. If you guys remember, we were just revisiting the topic of her involvement with ICE, and she was getting a lot of heat. And so she deflected that by now moving through Julia. And now Julia is getting a lot of the heat. If you guys have been on my social media recently, you know that I finally took some steps to protect my platforms and to fight back after the last 8 weeks. And it feeds, again, the same narrative that, so many things were done. And I haven't even gotten into, the shit with Walter and Sabrina, but you're pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And finally, when you respond, when you react, you are the crazy one. You are the one that is out of line. You are the psycho. You are this. You have the pattern of whatever. When really it's just reactive abuse. And so for 8 weeks, I have been abused online by Julia, by Michelle through Julia. And finally, I have taken some active steps that have unfortunately negatively impacted Julia. And again, because she has never dealt with this type of shit that I just laid out, she's probably very unaware of the legal ramifications of how it could affect her, how it's put her on the map. And unfortunately, I almost feel sad because now Michelle gets to sit back and Julia is on the chopping block. So again, that gives you some content, some context as to what's been going on, the facts of the story in detail. And we began my YouTube channel was something that I began just in the last few months. TikTok was a very hard place to really detail all of this, right? Screenshots, community guidelines are very hard to get around when showing receipts of this type. So I embraced the ability to come on here and be able to further expand and shed light on many parts of my story that I know a lot of people can relate on, from the mental disorder to the crazy, the courtship, the drama, and the resilience in my story of